we're ready now. All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Duki Matuka. It's my traditional name, but most people know me by Jocelyn. And I'm from Taiwan. I'm from the Pinmayan peoples. I'm from the Kasapakan community. And I used to work for Taiwan Indigenous TV, but now I'm working in politics. Anyway, I will be your moderator today. Hello, in Navayan, that's my language to greet people. And so thank you for joining the 4th episode of the special series, How to Indigenous Governance and Diplomacy for the Now. And today we're going to talk to some of the world's leading indigenous peoples representatives and allies to discuss perspectives and practical ideas on this important topic. They are all leaders in their respected field and committed to inspire and empower indigenous peoples around the world. So if you are participating in the Zoom or watching on the Facebook live stream, please let us know in the comments where you are watching from. And also we have some quick things to announce. First, that the webinar series will be recorded and repurposed for the Gomaluku podcast. And also, please do engage with each other in this conversation through the chat or the comment. And also let each other know what your answer would be to a question and if you have heard a good quote. And also, please help us to keep the conversation going on Twitter by using the hashtag #HowToIndigenousNow, and you can tag Ghazali in your post. It's at Gomaluku, at GOMALUKU. And feel free to share any questions or screenshots or feedback. And also, if you have joined us via Zoom, we have the amazing support of our interpreters. They are very important. Thank you. Thank them very much. We have interpreters in Spanish, French, and Russian. So you can select the language of your choice just below, somewhere here. I think you will see it. It should be somewhere there. And you can just make sure that if you are listening to the interpreter, just put the original language on mute. Okay, so that's the introduction to the series today. And should I go directly with our first guest? Yeah, okay. All right, so our first guest, she is an amazing lady. And I'm very honored that I've known her for some years. I've learned a lot from her. That's Rukka. Rukka from AMAN. She is the first female Secretary General of the Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Archipelago. I'm not so sure if my pronunciation is good, but we usually call it AMAN. It's the world's largest indigenous peoples organization, and it's in Indonesia. And Rukka is a Torajan from highlands of Sulawesi. It's a starfish-shaped island with the size of Florida. I'm very lucky that I visited Rukka's community last summer. And Rukka is known for her fiery oratory and her long-time dedication to the indigenous rights movement. And also her parents hosted a meeting in 1993, and that is often cited as its genesis of indigenous movement in Indonesia. So it's also the start of AMAN and the start of a lot of things, a lot of amazing journey of indigenous peoples in the world. So now I will hand over to Ghazali and also Rukka.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for being a co-host for the 4th episode, being a guest in the second episode, and then upgraded to a co-host. And probably you will host it by yourself in episode 8 or 9, maybe, because you're doing quite well. So thank you so much for that. Rukka, selamat malam. Hope you're doing okay. How are you doing so far? Let's start with 2 minutes, how you are doing handling the pandemic.
Um, I think this might hurt some if I say that I cherish the pandemic, because there are a lot of good things, a lot of good lessons from what is going on now, especially for us indigenous peoples. And this is the time for us. This is the time really for indigenous peoples to show the world that what we've been fighting for is true, because the pandemic, the virus, giving us all the answers now. We've been trying to convince government. We've been trying to convince all the invaders to come to our invaders on our indigenous territories. They never listen. Now, virus came and they say you have to listen to us. So that's and before we continue, I would say Manasu Moraka. That's my greetings. Tabea, Hotu, Selamat Malam, and we say Salam Nusantara because that's how we wrap all the indigenous greetings across archipelagos. Because if I have to mention one by one, we'll have to spend like one whole year. Ghazali knows that.
I know. Thank you so much for also greeting in like the various languages in Indonesia. Jumping right into it, you as the Secretary General, how did you navigate AMAN through the pandemic, and what is, you already alluded a little bit to it, what is the biggest lesson that you have learned as a leader?
I have mentioned earlier that this virus is our friend. We see the virus is actually the force that is sent by the nature, by the Mother Earth and our ancestor spirits to us to help us. Yeah, this virus, that's the lessons. For me, that's the first lessons. The virus is make sure that you have to stay where you are. Stop being greedy. This is really a punishment for greedy private companies. So that's the first lessons I really got. And how do we know that? And I think that's because from the beginning, we already, as organizations, we already have the preparations. We already have emergency response protocols in place since 2018, 2 years back. We already have that protocol. We already set up emergency response team. We already set up a special account for emergency response, so we don't have to all the time digging everywhere or begging from everybody. And especially now in the time of this virus, it's difficult to very rely on donors to give us money because they're also struggling. So we have that, and then from the beginning, we are ahead of even our government. Actually, before the government, our government, well, even until today, they are still in denial. But at the very beginning, they really refused to say that this is the crisis, this is the pandemic, and we have to do this. They never do that. But we already say, indigenous peoples, we cannot rely on others. We cannot rely on our government. We can only rely on ourselves. We can only rely on our culture and solidarity. That's our strength. So we immediately announced that we are in crisis. We have to stop traveling, and we actually canceled our big meeting, and everybody have to stay at home. We do lockdown, we call it Indigenous Lockdown, and also what we call quarantine with dignity. Quarantine with dignity is what we have to make sure with lockdown is you close the gate to indigenous community. We have to make sure that none of this virus will reach our community. If we are disciplined doing that, and that's also the time for the young people, young healthy people, yeah, healthy. It has to be healthy. Young healthy people to go and make posts watching posts, monitoring posts around our indigenous territorial boundaries. So that's also the time for us to again start to go and recognize every single inch of our territorial boundaries. So they doing that, and while we are doing the lockdown, all the activities around inside the community can be very normal. People still go to farm, people still go fishing, people still go to the fishermen still go to the sea, they go to the forest. It is still going on until now because we maintain that lockdown now. And then this is also what I would like to highlight, that through this pandemic, all the things that we believe in is happening. We believe in solidarity. We believe in women. We believe in young people. They are the one who leading this whole thing. The women, they form the groups, they make masks. The elders, the shamans, they make a traditional medicine. They give it around in the community. Everybody gets the vitamins, indigenous vitamins. And the young people, when we say women and young people, when we say we are going to have food crisis, everybody has to start planting the short-term crops. They did it immediately. And now some of our community have started to harvest because they started early in March. So now they're harvesting. So that's what is going on now in Indonesia. Indigenous communities, we are doing pretty well because we are prepared. We were prepared in the beginning.
Rukka, if you can, in terms of like, I think that it will be very interesting to Indigenous peoples representatives that also like our umbrella organizations. If you could describe, if you can, like the process of coordinating or communicating what you just now said, like it sounds like you all for empowerment of like women, youth. How do you communicate that? What methods do you use, and what is the message that you bring?
I think that's one of the bless of a communication technology. Yeah, we should, and also globalization. We shouldn't be against everything because we have to make sure that we get the best out of it, and then we have to make sure that all the bad impacts, all the bad aspects of this whole thing will not. We will avoid. We are using online communications, ICT. Yeah, information and communication technology we are using. Now, the only thing I regret now is I'm so tired of sitting in Zoom meetings. And this is also shows the dynamics that we are indigenous peoples. We have the capacity to adapt. Yeah. Can you imagine just last week, for the first time in the history, Apai Janggut, the elder from Sungai Uti in West Kalimantan, speaking to me on Zoom. So that's how what we call communication for empowerment of indigenous peoples, and especially our women and young people. So we are communicating, we are navigating, we are coordinating our works all through WhatsApp group. Facebook we don't do much, but we do WhatsApp group a lot, and also do this Google Meet. So we do all these different platform of communications. Of course, we do have challenges, big challenge, because that's the digital divide. Things comes in where even if we have connections, we don't have adequate bandwidth, so they can only listen, but they cannot show their video because if once they turn on the video, then it will go off. There's also places where we do have connections, but indigenous peoples, they don't have access to energy. Yeah, they are off grid. That's why even if they have tools and we can provide tools, they simply cannot because they are off grid. So these are the challenges that we are facing. It's a big challenge. It's so hard, but because we are working together across Indonesia, 21 our regional chapters at provincial level, and 114 local chapters. But I think the biggest challenge also is in your homeland, Ghazali, in the small islands, because and this is really shows the disparity of this country, because the small islands are always considered second class of territory. They don't have enough infrastructures. It's so difficult to communicate with them. Sometimes we feel like we want to send message through the wind if it's possible. Yeah, that's the thing. So indigenous peoples, I believe we do have the capacity to adapt quickly, very quickly. In the beginning, we all like struggling. How do we do this? How do we do that? But now we have like hundreds of people already can be a host of our Zoom meetings. So we spread around. They have their own meetings. So our principles is it is not social distancing. It is physical distancing. But because we need that social closeness, and that's our capital. The main capital of indigenous peoples is the social bond, solidarity among us. So that's how we adapt and survive so far, thank goodness.
Rukka, let me also like talk a little bit or set you up for something that you really would love to talk about. And I know that you are a very strong supporter of indigenous people's right in decision making. You talked about resiliency of indigenous people's adaptation. How does, for people that do not know, indigenous people's right to participate in decision making, how big of a role does that play in resiliency in your mind?
It is very much. I think if we talk about a different level, yeah. When we talk about, because indigenous peoples, we are now under the colonizations of modern state, and we always say nothing about us without us. Every single decision made that will impact our life, we have the right to be there to make the decision together. We have to be at the table. In Indonesia, it is also one of the examples that for more than 10 years now, we still unable to get our Indigenous Rights Act adopted. Why? Because we are not there. And also why all of these bad policies and bad laws are exist just because when they are made, our voice and our representatives is not there. So that's why it is very important for us, for indigenous peoples, to strengthen ourselves and find a way to navigate ourselves and find the mechanisms. How do we navigate and get into that decision making processes? We cannot be just become like spectators anymore. We have to be there, because we are talking about our life. It has to be our decision. So that's at when we're talking about the state, yeah, with the state public policy. When it comes to the indigenous peoples, again at two levels. When it comes to indigenous people who still holding on the traditions, who still have control over our ancestral territories, and we still manage our territory, we live every day from our territory, from our resources. Those are the ones who prove the resiliency. They are the one, because in the early beginning in March, we say we are going to have food crisis. So each of the community, we need to identify our food stock, how much we gonna last. Well, back then we kind of like underestimate actually the virus. We say we have to make sure for the next 3 to 6 months we have to have food. Indigenous people that I mentioned earlier, who still exercise their self-governance, the collective decision-making processes, where they involve like women, young people, all elements of the community, and they have control over the land. They are the ones who even have the food for like years. Yeah, but indigenous peoples who have been affected, My dog is barking. But indigenous peoples who have been impacted by the bad decisions made by our politicians, country's politicians, whose land have been taken away, whose land have been transformed into oil palm, who's now become the labor for big companies. They are the one who don't have anything. So it is very clear this has something to do because we don't have access to decision making as indigenous peoples, to decision making process in the public policies making, and therefore, and also they don't consider our voice. There is no like free, prior, and informed consent in the Indonesian policy and laws. And at the local, at the community level, where community are united and still have strong governance and decision-making process still going on, culture we still follow our ancestor way. They are the one who like, they even offer food to others. So we've been doing all of that, yeah, sending food to cities, you know, because it's now, it's very clear now, Ghazali and Jocelyn, that indigenous peoples, we are the one who feed the world, not Monsanto, not governments, not private sectors. We are indigenous peoples and farmers and peasant people, farmers. We are the one who give food to people, because we also have one big group in around Jakarta, around the capital, because there are so many, like millions, 100,000s of member of union workers has been laid off. So the farmers who are facing operations from the state company, they were the one who's sending 100 tons, has been sending 100 tons of rice to Jakarta and feed the laborers that have been jobless. It's not the company, it's not the government who give them food, but it is the farmers around Java who give them food. So I think that's, for me, that's one of the big message from the pandemic, that I truly believe we are the one, actually the actor of development. We are the one who giving the food to the world, not Monsanto, to be honest.
Thank you so much, Rukka. I think many indigenous people agree with you that now is the time for indigenous people to really assert their right to participate, to really be in those negotiations at the table, be in those discussions. What are your plans? I know that Indonesia is a very delicate situation in terms of implementing indigenous rights. What are your plans on implementing indigenous rights domestically in Indonesian context? And what role does diplomacy play in that?
Yeah, thank you. Diplomacy is very important, because diplomacy is a life skill. Yeah, the skill that actually everybody has the talent for that. But first, it has to be guided. Yeah, it has to be guided, and then these people who have the diplomacy skill will have to know where they are from, what kind of aspiration they have to bring in. So that's in AMAN, we work more at local level, provincial and district levels. Why it is one of our approach? Because the farther we are from our ancestral land, the weaker we are. Weaker in terms of, because we are small. So in the places where we are more like, it's not dominant, but it's more of we are politically can be dominant at local level. That's the place where we say, oh, this is where we can be in control. We can be on the right. We can influence the decision-making process. So through that, we have that kind of like scanning of the situations of local level Indonesia. So we started actually in 2007 that these are the place where we can we can educate, or we can develop our politicians. So we do have politicians, indigenous politicians, who we deliberately send to the local parliaments and also the national parliament, but with the very, very clear assignment and with the very clear mechanisms. Because we know when people goes to politics without a monitoring mechanisms by organization and by their people who they represent, they can lose into the cracks. So that's a very strategic now in Indonesia when we work at local level, because at national level, I can say we don't have control. And again, all these crazy political parties, they are, especially now Indonesia, I'm sure you know that all the state captures theory that we learn in political science is happening in Indonesia. And why I say state capture, because now in Indonesia, you cannot see the difference in terms of their positions and their aspirations between the administration's government and the parliament and the private sectors. They all have same voice. So this is what state capture is. So therefore, we need to get more of our people, our leaders, to learn how to do diplomacy, and we need to also provide them with platform, how they have to work. And also very important that they are just human being. We need to monitor them 24 hours. In my experience, every time it's like knock knock, how are you, and they say, yeah, I'm doing fine. You doing well? I say, yeah. You've been naughty? No, thank goodness. Yeah. So that's kind of things that we need to do with them. But also, don't let them alone. Yeah, we provide supports to them. Yeah, so we have like experts who can do the right things, and sometimes like in the middle of the night, I have to write talking points for them. That's totally fine, because that's what the constituency for. That's what the organization is for. We need to support because they are navigating in the very dark, gray world, and then we are the one who have to keep on providing them the light, the torch from behind. So that's my experience and my opinion on this, Ghazali. It's very, very important.
Well, thank you so much. And I think you touch upon a very serious element of diplomacy that a lot of people neglect, because a lot of people think it is all about position papers and big statements, but it's also very much about providing fingertip value, textual language. Doesn't matter what time it is, and it is very important that we as Indigenous peoples keep doing that, providing that information that the people that we support need. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Rukka, we're nearly ending, coming towards the end of our segment. Is there anything that we did not touch upon that you really want to talk about or want people to think about?
I think, and this is especially to our indigenous diplomats to take on from now, because now indigenous people, this is our moment. Yeah, this is our moment. This virus is our friend. It shows us the way where we have to go. It shows us it gives us the evidence how to argue. Yeah, and how to argue, how to convince our opponent, how to convince them. So I think we have to already think of not just stuck with the pandemic, but we already think of what's beyond this. So my message to our diplomats, including Ghazali and Jocelyn and whoever here, are probably watching on Facebook and kind of like giggling, but to all of our indigenous diplomats, if we see ourselves now, the next future, first, the current economic setting is no longer feasible. It is out of questions. What we need to have in the future, then we have to start now, is if we see economy, of course, we still have to be connected. That's why I say we cannot go against everything about globalizations, but I see our future economy, the new economy, should be economy that looks like a mosaic, but made of thousands, hundred thousands, millions of small local economies. Because the small local economy system, they are based on reciprocity, solidarity, indigenous systems, traditions. What we need to have for indigenous peoples is we need to bridge. Yeah, we need to have mechanism to bridge us with others, allowing us to continue to feed them. So that should be the things that we all, I mean, all the indigenous diplomacy out there have to be already thinking. So when you talk with government or private company, tell them we don't want you, we don't need you because we can help ourselves. So that's I think that's from me, Ghazali. So please keep that in mind whenever you go.
Thank you so much, Rukka, and hopefully, because we're not near the end of the webinar series yet, we can come back with you, because I'd love to unpack a lot more about your thoughts and your ideas. You're definitely leading one of the biggest Indigenous people's organizations in the world. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned that we can be shared with the other Indigenous peoples. And also, like, you are a role model as a Indigenous woman. So I think, yeah, there's definitely a lot more that we can say, of course, in 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you so much, Rukka. Terima kasih banyak.
And Tuhi. Terima kasih banyak. Excuse me, I need to turn off my video so I get better connection. We are in the third world, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you so much. Jocelyn, or how do you want me to talk to you from now on? Is it Tui or Jocelyn?
Well, let's try Tuhi from now on.
Tuhi it is. Tuhi it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So thank you again, Rukka. You know, I'm so happy that you mentioned about monitoring system to the indigenous politicians. That's something I was talking about last time, that, you know, we really need to have a system to go with the indigenous politicians in their work. Otherwise, the politicians are actually quite lonely and quite helpless a lot of times. So now we are turning to our next guest. So our next guest is Tove. I'm sorry for the pronunciation, but Tove Søvndahl Grant. I'm sorry, and she is from Greenland. She is the member of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and her term will be from this year, 1st of January until 2022 December 31. So 2 years. Oh, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3 years, and really bad at math. And she has for the last 6 years been a policy officer at the Human Rights Division of the European External Action Service, where she is responsible for a range of human rights files, including the rights of indigenous peoples, and for nearly 3 decades in her capacity as an official of the Greenland government. She also served as the executive secretary for the Indigenous Peoples Secretary of the Arctic Council in the years from 1996 to 2000. So I guess she will be and also she can provide us very good advices, important advices to how to be an indigenous politician, or how can we navigate ourselves in the overall politics. So, and now I hand over to Ghazali.
Thank you so much. I very much agree with you, Jocelyn. Tove, Arctic Council, the Parliament of the Greenland government, sorry, and the European Union. It's a very impressive, resume. So let's take a trip down memory lane, because I also know that you're now finishing up your term over at the EU. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us whilst you're finalizing your work over there. So maybe best question to start with is, because you've been in the Greenland government for 30 years. What is your biggest lesson from being in the Greenland government?
Yes, thank you to Tove and to Ghazali for your introductions, and also big thanks for organizing this very interesting webinar. It's a great concept. Just to sum up, I mean, regarding my resume, I mean, it has taken me 30 years to build it up. So no wonder it's so, yeah, large or broad. Now, let me just say that when I started as an official of the Greenland government, it was then still on what we call home rule. And that home rule was then expanded in 2009 to what we call self-government, which meant further competences, and also, most importantly, when it comes to subsoil resources, minerals, oils, etc., but also the recognition of the Greenland people as peoples according to international law with the right of self-determination. So there was a schedule agreed for if and when the people of Greenland wish to secede from the Danish kingdom, the Danish realm, then there is a process foreseen for that. Now, my biggest lesson from being with the Greenland government through 30 years is that self-determination, self-government is a process with many, many dimensions. And it's a process that needs to be internalized within each and every member of your people, and you have to keep constantly build up your capacity, build up education. I mean, focus on education of the young, but also lifelong learning for adults, and try to continue securing that the democratic safeguards even within your own people, and to maintain coherence within your own people or among your own people. And in order to maintain that coherence, you also need to focus very much on the everyday life and conditions of each and every member of your people. The reason why I'm saying that is that I mean, just because that we achieve an enhanced self-government where we can determine our own education sector, health sector, housing, production sector, fisheries, everything, it doesn't mean that that all is well. I mean, many people, ordinary people, will continue to struggle financially if there is also not a focus on their needs. And the reason why I'm saying it, that in the run-up to the self-government that we have now, that we got in 2009, you could sense that there was an enormous cohesion among the Greenland, within our people, and there was a lot of optimism and the promise of economic expansion. Everyone would get a better life, etc., etc. But then only a few years when the new government was, for many, many reasons, not able to really deliver in terms of increasing the well-being, the social well-being of especially the poorest among us, then there was a sense of discontent started to grow, and which in my opinion was then very much instrumentalized by what I will call ultra-nationalist or populist, national populist politicians. And where today, unfortunately, and that is my very personal opinion, where I see an enhanced polarization within Greenland society, within our own people. And that is very, very unfortunate. And that just, that it just underlines the importance of, I mean, in order to really maintain coherence within your own people, you have to have attention to how people live their ordinary lives and their living conditions, to make sure that everyone is happy, that also individuals' rights are safeguarded. So that was in short what I think is one of the biggest lessons from the Greenland situation.
No, thank you so much, Tove, for sharing that. Because I know that there's participants, or like panelists, attendees to the webinar series, people that are watching are very much interested because they want to elevate or bring back their indigenous government to make it more how do you say it, official, quote unquote, so that they can really exercise the right to self-determination. So like this brief insight is very much helpful. Like linking it to that, what is it that indigenous governments or potentially indigenous governments should be paying more attention to in order to become stronger for themselves, and then also hopefully in extension of that, strengthen the movement?
Let me just start by saying that the Greenland government is not per definition an indigenous government. It's a territorial public government, but where us Greenlanders, the Greenland Inuit, are in majority. So it is, you can say it's a de facto indigenous government.
Sure, yeah.
But what should we pay attention to become stronger as indigenous movement? For certain is that we need to, I mean, as I said before, continuously invest in cohesion, but also have strong networks, I mean, with each other, and really, and also invest in also our relations with indigenous peoples in all over the world, and maybe also in particular our neighboring countries, because there is a lot to be learned in exchanging on best practices, lessons learned, etc., and also for generating ideas. I mean, other indigenous peoples may have solutions for something that we know, that we experience, but that we never thought of ourselves. I mean, one example is, for instance, in Greenland, like in many, among many sort of more urbanized indigenous peoples or societies, you see a very, very high level of a suicide rate among the young, and especially among the men, the young men, the boys. And there, other indigenous peoples may have actually solutions that we never really thought about or that we never tried. So that is just one example. Yeah, that in short, this is.
Sure. Just for people's view, like how would you start in terms of like creating a strong network? What would you be looking for in terms of, would you be looking at governments, indigenous governments, or would you be looking at umbrella organizations like AMAN, or what would you be your process?
I think it's a matter of being as open-minded as possible, not focusing so much on what the status is of the different organizations. I mean, it can be indigenous governments to governments cooperation. It can be indigenous parliaments to other parliaments. It can be, you know, sort of more NGO type umbrella organizations. Anything. I mean, we need to. We need to build a worldwide web consisting of indigenous peoples coming together at many levels, connecting, yeah, all sorts of types of organizations, networks of, yeah, with different statuses.
Thank you so much. I think that really sticks. I think like we are people that taking on notes. I think that will be a soundbite of you, like the World Wide Web of indigenous organizations, like bringing a strong network. Thank you so much for that. Let's talk about COVID-19, the reality of it. How do you think that it will impact the conduct of indigenous representative institutions?
I think around the world we are, I mean, as Rukka just described how they're handling it in Indonesia, but I also heard examples also from other continents how indigenous peoples and their representative institutions or organizations are really exercising self-government or even self-determination in responding to the COVID-19. And I think the successful responses, I mean, will empower further indigenous-owned institutions. And it will also enhance the visibility of the importance of indigenous self-determination, self-governance, vis-a-vis states, but other actors also in the sort of mainstream society. What we should also be mindful of is that if we have examples of indigenous communities, societies that have not been successful and where you see very high death rates, despite of them, you know, having been in charge of taking on their own measures, then it can also very easily be used against them as a way of saying, you want to conduct your own affairs. How successful were you when you tried to manage the COVID-19 crisis on your own? So I think, I mean, it can go both ways, but from seeing the many good examples of how, I mean, how indigenous peoples around the world are conducting themselves, I think that indigenous peoples actually will come out much more, come out much stronger following the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you so much, Tove. Also, a little bit of a sidestep is like you're now finalizing your term, your work over in Brussels. What I'm seeing in the movement is that a lot of Indigenous people see the United Nations as they have it on a pedestal, and they almost like neglect the European Union, whereas its reach is further than within continental Europe. That's why I'm fascinated by how Indigenous peoples undervalue advocacy at the European Union. What would be your pitch, if I can call it a pitch, and for Indigenous peoples to start participating, and in which process would you suggest Indigenous peoples to start engaging?
I would say it's good that the Indigenous people hold the United Nations in such high regard. And in fact, the European Union is also, I mean, part of its founding values is also based on the Charter of the United Nations, and is very, very much dedicated to the United Nations. But what is important to remember is that the European Union is not only the biggest donor in the world when it comes to development cooperation, but also when it comes to support for democracy and human rights. But it's not only in terms of money, it is also a very strong global player when it comes to values, I mean, the respect for human rights and democracy. And it also have policies on Indigenous peoples. And the European Union is present in more than 140 countries around the world in delegations, by delegations. And even in those countries where it's not present, then there is also some sort of cooperation. I think what is important is that the Indigenous peoples start to pay much more attention to actually engaging at country level with the EU delegations around the world. For instance, when it comes to human rights defenders, I mean, we all know that Indigenous human rights defenders are disproportionately affected by killings and violence. And in this sense, then it's very important to actually reach out to the human rights defenders liaison officers that there are in each and every EU delegation around the world. But there is also, as part of the bilateral relation between the EU and the individual countries, partner countries, there is also usually some sort of a dialogue going on every year. And those dialogues are also accompanied by dialogues with civil society. And you were there yourself, Ghazali, when we had a roundtable, EU roundtable with Indigenous peoples experts and representatives back in February here in Brussels, and where we actually realized that in those civil society dialogues that the EU organizes in its partner countries, Indigenous peoples' organizations or institutions are not really represented. And so here is a job, I mean, real job for Indigenous peoples around the world to actually go meet the EU delegations and say, hey, we want to be part of that, even though we're not technically a civil society organizations, because it can be Indigenous governments, but at least it's a foot in the door. But I would also say that, and then of course, I mean, engaging with European Union staff at delegations also gives more visibility when it comes to, for instance, I mean, the EU delegation manages grants, both under the human rights support grants, but also in relation to environment, civil society empowerment, etc. And by engaging directly with the EU delegations, then staff will also get to know Indigenous peoples better and to understand that, I mean, this is something that we need to pay more attention to. So that in the end will be beneficial for Indigenous peoples. But I will also say that it's also important when, and then I will come back to some of my earlier points, what of course will give Indigenous peoples more legitimacy is that you try to connect as networks so that you are as united as possible also when you meet European Union delegations. Yeah, because there is a lot of competition for attention, and I think Indigenous peoples will be more successful if more organizations, networks actually unite, get together when building up their engagement with the EU.
Thank you so much, Tove. Also, I think like for people that know, thank you so much for inviting us for that roundtable. It was very informative both ways, both for the European side, but also for Indigenous people's side, knowing like where is the level of knowledge and the level of engagement. And I think like two of the things from Indigenous side, at least, two of the recommendations that we made, if you can call it a recommendation, is one, of course, like a permanent, not permanent, but almost like a permanent form within the European Union, so that we have like a direct link with access, dialogue within the EU. I think that is something that we brought forward, as well as the need for the European Union to also communicate more in substance, but not just as in style, but in substance as well with the Sami. Like the Sami at this point, like not at this point, they are the only Indigenous peoples that are currently situated in Europe. And we saw that there was a lack of a substantive, strong dialogue between the European Union and the Sami. And I think that is also an outcome of the roundtable being so open, as in like we could interact with one another, ask questions. I think that is something that I would very much encourage, even though like you're finalizing your 6-year term, the European Union to continue doing. Now that you're coming to the end of the 6 years, anything that stood out for you, like could be personally, could be professionally, anything that pops into your mind, like, all right, that was fun to do, or that's when I look back at my 6 years, that is something that I really, a memory that I will hold or cherish. Anything that comes to your mind?
I think, I mean, there are so very many things, but one thing that stood out is that the knowledge of EU staff across the board is very, very uneven. I mean, there are some who has a tremendous knowledge about it and understanding on Indigenous people's rights, and all the way down to concrete country situations. And then there are others who don't really understand. But what I felt, I mean, what I experienced is that, I mean, in a way, the European institutions are very, very open. So you can actually, as an individual staff, get a lot of influence. And that is one thing that I will take back. That I think that I managed to, insert a fingerprint or footprint here and there in various policy documents, agreements, etc. And also the now new coming, the EU is currently preparing its multi-annual framework, financial framework, and where, of course, also with help with all the colleagues, managed to get language in on Indigenous peoples, so that Indigenous peoples is actually secured firmly in major policy and financial instruments of the EU. But it will require a continuous push also from Indigenous people's side, and also for you to continuously also reach out to colleagues. I mean, there will still be colleagues when I leave who are working on this on the Indigenous people's files, and who feels very much committed to the recommendations, outcomes of this roundtable that we had, including on the suggestion and trying to make a sort of more global event of the roundtable we have to a sort of recurring event. No guarantees, but if you keep pushing, I'm sure it will happen one day. Thank you.
Tove, final question. It's okay if you haven't thought about it yet. What are your plans as a member of the Permanent Forum? What is going to be your, and I use this word with Pancho, the special rapporteur already, what is going to be your special sauce, your special ingredient to the mix?
I mean, of course, apart from focusing on those issues where I know that I have fair amount of expertise, human rights, sustainable development issues, then I think one of the things that I would like to work on is to ensure that the Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues have an impact at country level, at very global level, and that we are actually able to contribute to and inspire the global dialogue among Indigenous peoples themselves as part of building this worldwide web, as I talked about before, but also to ensure that the Permanent Forum becomes a little bit more dynamic and become a forum for exchange, for exploring new ideas, for more sort of robust discussions. I mean, as it is now, I mean, all of you who've been to the Permanent Forum knows that in a way it has become a grievance mechanism. Huh? Which there is also a need for, but I think we need to focus on being more operational somehow or other, and I would like to contribute to that. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Tove. I know you're packing up over there in Brussels and trying to round everything up. So thank you so much for being with us, and looking forward to meeting you in person.
Yes.
at the Permanent Forum.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this webinar. Ciao, everyone.
All right. Thank you very much again, Tove. And I'm also very much looking forward to your term at the Permanent Forum with the 30 years of experience in the EU. And I'm looking forward to this. Maybe we will open a different way of communication between governments and between the forum members with the Indigenous peoples. And next, our next guest will be Dr. Handaine Mohamed. He is a historian and expert in Indigenous issues, climate change, and biodiversity through decades of advocacy on behalf of the Indigenous African region. He is currently the chairperson of IPACC, the Indigenous Peoples of Africa Co-ordinating Committee, which was founded in 1997. IPACC is one of the main transnational network organizations recognized as a representative of African indigenous peoples in dialogues with the governments and bodies such as the United Nations. So again, I think this episode of this webinar is very valuable because we will be really learning a lot from the first-hand diplomatic challenges, and also how our people are encountering, how our people are handling all these challenges, and to find the possibilities and the change we can make from all these challenges. So now again, I'm handing over to Ghazali.
Thank you so much, Sui. Sorry, I almost wanted to say the other name. Tuhi, thank you so much for that introduction. So everyone, like I'm sure that Mr. Handaine Mohamed wants to speak in French. So if you have not done so, please choose your language setting for interpreters into the language of your choosing. Before I get into questions, just for 2 minutes, Handaine, about yourself, introduce yourself so that people can get to know you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ghazali. Thank you very much for all participants.
En français, c'est bon.
Ah, c'est bon, ok.
Ah, c'est bon, c'est bon, c'est bon.
Ok, donc bonjour Monsieur Ghazali, bonjour mes amis, les participants. Je suis ravi d'être parmi vous en tant que participant. Je remercie chaleureusement, infiniment mon ami Ghazali qui m'a invité à participer dans cette rencontre si importante. Donc, moi, je suis Mohamed Handaine du Maroc. Je suis historien et expert en matière de changement climatique et la biodiversité et président de l'IPACC, Comité de coordination des peuples autochtones d'Afrique. Donc, notre mission en tant que réseau international est la sensibilisation des peuples autochtones pour leurs droits élémentaires, pour leurs droits culturels, identitaires, et pour les sensibiliser, pour être heureux, être fiers de leur culture et de leur langue et de leur savoir traditionnel. Vous savez maintenant que la communauté internationale, les Nations Unies, l'UNESCO, etc., donnent beaucoup d'importance aux savoirs traditionnels qui sont très importants pour la lutte contre les effets du changement climatique et la protection de la biodiversité. Vous savez également que les
No, I think the connection has been a little bit of challenging. So hopefully we'll, yeah, I think hopefully he can come back in a bit when he gets a good connection. Hopefully he doesn't get mad at me for doing this. Oh, there he is.
Environ 80% et les grands fonds. There is a problem. Vous m'entendez? OK. Donc, vous savez que les communautés, les peuples autochtones contrôlent environ 80% de la biodiversité. Et les grandes forêts comme la forêt de l'Amazone, l'Afrique centrale, constituent les poumons de l'humanité, les poumons de notre terre, et contrôlés par les peuples autochtones. La mission de l'IPACC est une mission extrêmement importante. Comme vous le savez, nous avons en Afrique environ les 30% de la population africaine est autochtone. Et les savoirs traditionnels les plus anciens sont dans notre continent africain. Donc, nous travaillons à plusieurs niveaux. Nous faisons un travail de proximité, c'est-à-dire on travaille avec les peuples autochtones dans les espaces, dans leur proximité, à savoir un travail de terrain. Et donc, nous travaillons au niveau du changement climatique. Nous avons fait plusieurs ateliers concernant la sensibilisation des peuples autochtones en Afrique du Nord, en Afrique du Sahel, l'Afrique de l'Est et l'Afrique du Sud et l'Afrique centrale. Donc, on essaye de sensibiliser la population autochtone, les peuples autochtones, pour donner plus d'importance à leur savoir traditionnel. Nous travaillons également au niveau international dans ce qu'on appelle la diplomatie des peuples autochtones. Alors, la diplomatie des peuples autochtones est très, très importante. Vous avez vu que les activités des représentants des peuples autochtones partout dans le monde est très, très important pour évaluer évaluer les conventions internationales pour introduire les savoirs traditionnels, pour introduire les droits des peuples autochtones. Nous avons également, au niveau de l'IPACC, ce qu'on appelle IPACC est un institut de formation de leadership. Pendant 20 ans que nous travaillons au niveau des peuples autochtones, nous avons construit, nous avons des leaderships qui travaillent maintenant au niveau international, et à savoir Hindu Umaro, que vous connaissez très bien, est une membre, est une élève, est une étudiante des peuples de l'IPACC. Mr. Nigel Grauhal, qui travaille maintenant à l'UNESCO, qui est chef d'un département à l'UNESCO, était directeur de l'IPACC. Vital, et nous avons récemment une membre de l'IPACC qui est devenue récemment ministre de l'environnement au niveau dans Burundi. Donc, IPACC est une école de formation de leadership des peuples autochtones. Si vous avez quelques questions, je suis disponible à partager avec vous quelques informations. Merci.
Thank you so much for explaining the organization IPACC, as well as the impact of IPACC as a training facility environment for Indigenous peoples, especially from Africa. And thank you so much for explaining that and also doing that. And you are currently the chairperson of IPACC. What are, in your view, experiences, the biggest lessons you have learned from representing IPACC at the international level?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you can answer that question, that would be great. So the question was, if you Handaine, if you can you hear me at all? Is that, can you hear me?
No, j'entends.
Oh, all right. So, well, that's going to be difficult if I want to ask a question and if you cannot hear me. Perhaps if you put your interpretation off, maybe that would help.
I have a problem with my connection, maybe. Oh.
But so you cannot hear my questions. So you can apparently not. So that's going to be challenging. So can you hear my question if I ask you what the biggest challenge is, a lesson for you as a chair of IPACC? All right, well, unfortunately, like now, at least in my screen, he has frozen. Hopefully we can get him back like at the end. So I apologize, Handaine, maybe in a couple of minutes you have a better connection so that we can continue this conversation. I apologize for this to you, Handaine, and also everyone else watching. So maybe Tuhi, maybe we can move on to whoever is next on your list for this episode.
Sure. Well, but I hope that we can get him back very soon. And next, I would like to introduce Miss. I'm sorry again if I pronounce it wrong. Miss Hortensia Haidako. So she is Aymara, and she's very active for Indigenous Women's Network on biodiversity in Latin America and the Caribbean. And also, she is also working for the Chaskinya Rampi Indigenous Communication and Research Center. So again, Ghazali and Hortensia.
And Hortensia, thank you so much. We had a little bit of challenges last session, but very glad to have you with us in this episode. If you can talk to me or us about what are the major themes on your mind or have developed the further of the last 100 days during the pandemic in terms of indigenous governance and diplomacy.
Buenos días a todas y todos. Un saludo cordial desde el norte de Chile, desde territorio Aymara. Aquí vivimos en frontera con Perú y Bolivia. Contarles que situarlos un poco geográficamente, en la región de Latinoamérica estamos en plena pandemia, ¿no? Es lo que llamamos la fase 4. Aquí en nuestra región de América Latina estamos en una crisis sanitaria hoy día respecto a lo que pasa con la pandemia del COVID. Lamentablemente estamos perdiendo muchas vidas de pueblos indígenas, algunos países más que otros, por ejemplo, Brasil, Ecuador, Bolivia. Hay situaciones bastante graves. De los 9 países también que divide la Amazonía, hay algunos que están gravemente afectados, nuevamente Brasil. Y también tiene que ver con un tema de cómo estamos perdiendo la democracia en Latinoamérica y un retroceso en la democracia con algunos gobiernos fundamentalistas que están hoy día en el poder. En estos últimos 100 días en el tema del COVID, bueno, aquí, por ejemplo, hoy día nosotras estamos en cuarentena obligatoria estamos en toque de queda, que significa que los militares se hacen cargo en las noches del territorio, y estamos confinados en nuestras viviendas. Y desde los pueblos indígenas, ¿cuáles han sido un poco las medidas que se han tomado? Primero es exigir a los gobiernos de turno tener una información específica respecto a cómo está afectando a los pueblos indígenas. Lamentablemente en América Latina son muy pocos los países que están especificando datos referentes a pueblos indígenas. Primero, hay mucha información que es falsa, que no es la verdadera, porque hay informaciones que hay más afectados, enfermos y muertos en muchos países y que no cuentan. Cada semana tenemos un informe epidemiológico que otorga el gobierno. Sin embargo, en esos informes epidemiológicos no hace referencia a pueblos indígenas, no hay nada respecto a pueblos indígenas. Entonces es una construcción diaria que estamos haciendo de recabar la información, de recabar los datos para poder tener una información más acabada. Y desde los pueblos indígenas hay diferentes iniciativas, bajo la libre determinación, en virtud de este derecho también que nos otorga algunos instrumentos internacionales como la Declaración de Naciones Unidas sobre Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas o el Convenio 169 de la OIT. Algunos pueblos indígenas han tomado estas medidas bajo la libre determinación y en virtud de esa determinación han cerrado sus comunidades, han cerrado o bloqueado sus comunidades para no dejar entrar que esas personas que vengan de las ciudades a los territorios en área rural. En un principio, en los primeros meses, los afectados indígenas solamente eran del área urbana. La falta de medidas o protocolos sanitarios desde el área de salud, desde los distintos gobiernos, han sido tan malas que lamentablemente hoy el área rural, donde están las comunidades indígenas, están siendo afectadas y lamentablemente tenemos bastantes fallecidos, hermanos indígenas y hermanas indígenas que han muerto por la pandemia, producto de la pandemia. Y esta es responsabilidad de los gobiernos de turno que no han tomado las medidas. Por otro lado, bajo esta libre determinación, algunos pueblos, como te comentaba, han tomado las medidas necesarias en esto de cerrar o hacer cercos sanitarios, de controlar la entrada y la salida de las comunidades. También algo que se está utilizando bastante es lo que es la medicina indígena y es la gran alternativa hoy día. Cuando aún no tenemos una respuesta a una vacuna o a un medicamento que pueda ayudar a aliviar un poco esta pandemia, tenemos la medicina indígena y bajo estos conocimientos tradicionales o los conocimientos indígenas es que muchos hermanos y hermanas a nivel del territorio, a nivel de país, están trabajando la medicina indígena y también la alimentación sana y desde los pueblos indígenas, que un poco viene a fortalecer el sistema inmunológico de las personas para que no afecte tanto. Hoy día, como te decía, estamos en la fase 4 de esta epidemia, donde el virus está en todos los lugares, donde cualquiera de nosotros ya hemos visto familiares, amistades, enfermos o morirse del COVID. En Latinoamérica estamos en una fase terrible. Entonces, la medicina indígena está siendo una alternativa y los no indígenas hoy día están valorando más estos conocimientos tradicionales de los pueblos indígenas para poder fortalecer un poco el sistema inmunológico y poder estar un poco más tranquilos. Entonces, nuestros médicos indígenas, médicos tradicionales, en Aymara se le llama Koyiri, que es la persona que sana, están hoy día jugando un rol fundamental para poder ayudar en esta pandemia. Bueno, y por otro lado, también es que seguimos demandando al gobierno que pueda realmente tomar las medidas necesarias, porque no las ha tomado. O sea, tenemos cero iniciativa respecto al gobierno en cuanto a tener una especificidad hacia los pueblos indígenas o a tener una política adecuada en términos sanitarios para los pueblos indígenas. No hay nada. Y también, por otro lado, en esta pandemia viene a reflejar la situación real que viven los pueblos indígenas, que es la falta de servicios básicos. Porque se nos llama como medida a lavarse las manos, por ejemplo. Y algunas comunidades indígenas no tienen agua, ¿no? Si bien es cierto, las personas hemos paralizado un poco nuestras vidas, pero no así el extractivismo. El extractivismo, las empresas siguen saqueando territorios indígenas a nivel nacional. Y hoy día también se habla de la reactivación económica, que cuando pase esto en algunos meses más, seguramente se va a reactivar la economía, y ahí es la gran preocupación también. Esa reactivación económica, ¿cómo va a afectar a los pueblos indígenas cuando se realiza en territorios indígenas? Entonces ahí es como la gran preocupación también en esto, en esta llamada reactivación económica, entre comillas, que nos puede afectar a los pueblos indígenas. Y bueno, y las mujeres indígenas también han jugado un rol fundamental en lo que son los saberes y los conocimientos, ¿no? En compartir estos saberes y conocimientos indígenas. Desde la Red de Mujeres Indígenas sobre Biodiversidad de América Latina y el Caribe, hemos realizado una serie de conversatorios virtuales, de webinar, principalmente viendo el tema de la espiritualidad y la medicina indígena para combatir la pandemia. La espiritualidad de los pueblos indígenas es sumamente importante, que no puede ir separada del conocimiento indígena y de la enfermedad. Entonces, estamos un poco en esa discusión, en esa valorización también, porque hay mucho miedo. Hay mucho miedo a la muerte, mucho miedo a enfermarse, mucha tristeza por las personas que han partido, las muertes que han ocurrido por el COVID. Entonces, desde la espiritualidad, también cómo poder sanar eso, cómo poder fortalecerse en estas pérdidas. Hay familias que han perdido, personas que han perdido la familia completa. Entonces, cómo desde la espiritualidad poder sanarse, poder desde las ceremonias indígenas fortalecer también esta grave situación que estamos viviendo los pueblos indígenas, principalmente aquí en Latinoamérica. Y eso es lo que estamos haciendo, y también poniendo en práctica estos saberes, estos conocimientos.
Thank you so much, Hortensia, for explaining all that. First question that comes into my mind after this is how can, because I'm all about providing value, how can we as Indigenous Peoples Movement at the international level or the United Nations help you in what you're trying to achieve? Like you talked about Indigenous medicine, you talked about self-governance. What comes to your mind how we can help you, or the United Nations should help you?
Bueno, yo creo que una de las primeras actuaciones que debiera hacer Naciones Unidas, yo sé que no tiene un mandato específico para presionar a los gobiernos de turno, pero es necesario que los gobiernos cumplan ciertos instrumentos internacionales. En el caso de Chile, no tenemos un reconocimiento constitucional como pueblos indígenas. Hay muchas materias con pueblos indígenas y existen muchas recomendaciones. El Foro Permanente de Naciones Unidas tiene muchísimas recomendaciones, pero a veces las recomendaciones desde Naciones Unidas, las recomendaciones de relatores especiales de Naciones Unidas, quedan como cartas de amor, como le llamamos, ¿no? Que quedan en el aire, sin embargo no hay cumplimiento. Yo creo que sí lo que debiera haber algo, no sé, reglamentos, estatutos que realmente se cumplan para ser efectivo. Y para tomar cualquier medida política que requiera o que afecte a los pueblos indígenas, lo importante es que exista participación plena y efectiva de los pueblos indígenas. Yo creo que eso es lo más importante que debe haber, porque a veces hay ciertas materias que se consultan y se realiza la pseudoconsultas, pero esas consultas no están bajo lo que es el derecho internacional del consentimiento previo, libre e informado. No son consultas rápidas, son consultas que solamente uno firma y eso es como ya, esto está consultado, por lo tanto vamos a hacer tal tipo de política. Entonces, es importante el cumplimiento, es sumamente importante del consentimiento libre, previo e informado, pero también es un poco que los gobiernos de turno entiendan qué es la libre determinación. ¿Qué es la libre determinación para los pueblos indígenas? Nosotros hasta el momento tenemos aún aquí en Chile una constitución que es heredada de la dictadura. Es una constitución de la dictadura y estamos en un proceso para una constituyente, para cambiar esta constitución. La pandemia ha postergado el proceso. Sin embargo, ya en octubre ya estamos comenzando este proceso, pese a la pandemia, estamos comenzando este proceso constituyente para ir a una votación si queremos o un plebiscito para cambiar esta constitución. Entonces, eso esperamos, tener esa participación para poder cambiar esta constitución y en esa constitución poner algunos artículos realmente que tengan que ver con los derechos de los pueblos indígenas y la participación política de los pueblos indígenas también, que es lo que hoy día estamos discutiendo, los escaños políticos para los pueblos indígenas en la participación política. Entonces, esas como son, para mí son fundamentales la participación plena y efectiva, el tema del consentimiento libre, previo e informado, y poder entender que algunos pueblos, por ejemplo, como pueblo mapuche, está tratando de aplicar la libre determinación. Para eso han hecho escuelas de la libre determinación para poder entender. Pero ciertamente el gobierno no entiende qué es la libre determinación de los pueblos indígenas. Bueno, acá está sesgado, ¿no? Por una política de la dictadura que hasta el momento de hoy persiste, entonces es como un poco el rechazo hacia eso, pero en ese camino vamos, ¿no? A una participación política y lo que esperamos es una participación plena y efectiva, incluyendo, por supuesto, a las mujeres indígenas que hemos luchado tantos años por poder un poco hacer escuchar estas voces, y hoy día con esta pandemia justamente se está haciendo así. Las mujeres indígenas, los tata que le llamamos, que son los más ancianos, hoy día son muy valorados por la sociedad en general, por sus conocimientos hoy día, y están entregándonos todo lo que son las medicinas.
So thank you so much, Hortensia, for also like talking a lot more about the constitutional reform, that process. I think that is very important. It is, and I see it not just myself, but like Indigenous peoples all around the world. We see it emerging. Australia is happening right now. At least that's what Professor Megan Davis in episode 1 was talking about. That constitutional reform is very necessary, and she also put it very upfront that the right to self-determination is key, and not just. And I think this is something that a lot of people need to understand. It is about the right to self-determination from the indigenous point of view, and not just a Western, quote unquote, definition of right to self-determination. And I think that is something that for example, the Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples can very much be in favor for that process that you're working on. I see Tove, so like she's waving at me, so like that she has a couple of questions. So I would like to now give the floor back to Tove to ask you some questions.
Thank you, Ghazali, and thank you, Hortensia. You mentioned about constitutional reform, and actually we are also trying to do that in Taiwan. And one of the most important agenda that we are trying to do is, of course, to have indigenous rights. Well, in Taiwan, the constitution recognizes indigenous people's rights, but we want to push it further for having our right to realize not only on the dimension of culture or economic side, but more of the political side. So I would like to ask Hortensia about this, is that, you know, we talk about sovereignty, we talk about self-determination, and I realized that actually, I don't know if it's also through your experience, people are a bit afraid of talking about sovereignty. And it's also among indigenous peoples ourselves. I mean, like in Taiwan, people, when we talk about sovereignty, people are like, what are you trying to create, to build your own country or what? Why you are talking about sovereignty? It's dangerous to talk about sovereignty. But I would say we have to talk about it. And also, I would like to ask Hortensia, what's your thoughts on the best way to really scale indigenous sovereignty and self-determination from individual to community?
Bueno, creo que primero es importante entenderlo, y todavía no en este país o en Chile falta mucho por poner en práctica, ¿no?, la autodeterminación. Falta aún más escuela donde organizarnos mejor para que nuestros hermanos y hermanas puedan entender el derecho internacional. Porque cuando en este país, o como en muchos, no hay derechos de pueblos indígenas en las leyes nacionales, ¿qué debemos hacer? Acudir a los instrumentos internacionales. Entonces, primero es fundamental conocer estos instrumentos internacionales, mucho más, y luego es también entender el rol que tenemos como personas en hacer política. Los pueblos indígenas, la ciudadanía le teme hacer política, porque claro, como te digo, venimos de una dictadura que duró muchísimos años, donde no se podía hacer política, entonces es el miedo constante a hacer política. Y lo que sí tenemos que hacer es esto, hacer política, poner temas en la mesa, un poco, y en nuestro caso poner los temas que tienen que ver con los pueblos indígenas, con el territorio. Y aquí es fundamental la inclusión de todos y todas, ¿no? Desde la niñez, desde los jóvenes, desde las mujeres, desde los más adultos. Entonces, el tema es intergeneracional, ¿no? Tiene que estar esta cabida para todos. Y en este proceso que hoy día se viene, esperamos poder participar y poner, como tú dices, muchas veces se habla desde el territorio y la cultura. Aquí han habido muchas propuestas de reconocimiento constitucional a los pueblos indígenas, pero solo se han basado en propuestas que tienen que ver con lo cultural, porque lo folclorizan, porque ven los pueblos indígenas solamente desde la cultura, el que baila, el que teje, pero los pueblos indígenas somos más que eso, y se niegan al tema del territorio, ¿no? Y esto va a ocurrir en muchos lugares, porque en el territorio es donde están los recursos naturales que sustentan la economía de un país. Entonces, por eso es tan difícil muchas veces hablar del tema territorial y de la autodeterminación, porque se privilegia la economía del país. Y en esto está pasando también con el tema del COVID. Aquí se ha privilegiado la economía del país versus la salud de las personas. porque las industrias extractivistas, las empresas siguen trabajando. Y el pequeño agricultor o el pequeño vendedor, el comerciante, es el que está paralizado hoy día en sus labores. Entonces, lamentablemente esa es la situación de privilegiar la economía. Chile se ve como para afuera, como el país, como el jaguar de Latinoamérica, ¿no? Que está en un per cápita muy alto en su economía o en una economía que está muy estable. Sin embargo, los pueblos indígenas que hemos sido ricos en territorio y en recursos, nos han empobrecido. Y en esa pobreza, hoy día se desnuda una realidad, que ni siquiera hay servicios básicos para combatir hoy día el COVID, que no tenemos centros de salud en muchas comunidades o muchos territorios indígenas para sobrevivir a este COVID. Entonces, en esa tardanza de trasladar a las personas de un área urbana, o sea, de un área rural a un área urbana, o a lugares donde no hay centros de salud, las personas mueren, se contagian más. Entonces, esa es la situación que tenemos. Pero yo tengo mucha fe. Los pueblos indígenas hemos sido resilientes a medida de las etapas. Y la historia, los pueblos indígenas hemos pasado por muchas adversidades. Y esta no es la primera pandemia que atravesamos. Son muchas las que hemos pasado. Quizás esta es más fuerte y comunicacionalmente se ve más hoy día, ¿no? Que hoy día tenemos otros tipos de comunicación que llegan a más personas. Pero hemos sido resilientes a sobrevivir estas pandemias y yo creo que así lo vamos a hacer. Y a través de los conocimientos indígenas es también una gran alternativa para sobrevivir esta pandemia. Y es por eso que valoramos tanto esta situación de nuestros conocimientos. Hoy día nos vemos afectados terriblemente, o sea, no vemos a nuestros familiares por mucho tiempo, no nos podemos abrazar, no nos podemos dar muestras de cariño, y es como una cultura nueva, ¿no? Una cultura que tuvimos que aprender rápidamente, uno que está acostumbrado a verse y a abrazarse, y así como, esto ya no. Es como una nueva cultura y quizás cuando pase esto, no sé si vamos a volver a abrazarnos así rápidamente o nos va a costar, pero así hoy día estamos. Hay fechas importantes de ceremonias, de fiestas en nuestras comunidades que la hemos postergado por esta situación. Yo vivo aquí en un lugar que es fronterizo con Perú y Bolivia. Tenemos familia en diferentes partes, muchos de los que vivimos aquí en el norte de Chile, porque el pueblo aymara está dividido en fronteras y en países, pero es un solo territorio. Y en mi caso yo llevo meses sin ver a mi papá, que está al otro lado de la frontera. Y así en muchos casos que por no poder entrar a comunidades, a lugares, es que no vemos a nuestros familiares y estamos muy preocupados que esta pandemia les vaya a afectar. Pero sin duda, lo que tenemos que ver es que los estados puedan comprender libremente. Aquí en Chile, fíjate que hace algunos años atrás no se podía hablar de la palabra pueblo. Entonces, no se comprendía pueblos indígenas, sino nos llamaban etnias, porque era muy subversivo entender el concepto pueblos. Se logró masificar y hoy día se entienden pueblos indígenas y la palabra pueblo. Hoy día lo que le temen es a la palabra, la autodeterminación, la libre determinación, pero en eso estamos, educando a la ciudadanía, educando a los políticos y a los gobiernos de turno que tienen que comprender qué es la autodeterminación y que en virtud a esa autodeterminación es que libremente podemos elegir nuestra forma de vivir, ¿no? Nuestra economía, nuestra actividad social, cultural y política. Entonces, en eso estamos y en eso estamos avanzando en este proceso constituyente que esperamos que realmente ocurra, porque se ha venido postergando por el tema de la pandemia, como en otros países también que han tenido que postergar. Bolivia la tenemos al lado. No llevan a un proceso eleccionario supuestamente por la pandemia. y tenemos con otros países vecinos que están pasando las mismas situaciones. En Latinoamérica es un poco esa la situación, ¿no? Es lo que yo les comentaba al comienzo, de un poco que las democracias hoy día están en peligro. Las democracias con estos gobiernos fundamentalistas, un poco de derecha, y que son demasiado extractivistas, como lo que está ocurriendo en Brasil, por ejemplo, que es una situación terrible, que la cantidad de muertos diarios es muy grande. Entonces, en esa es la situación la que estamos viviendo hoy día, y confiados en que la vamos a superar. Esa es como la gran aspiración de que esto pase rápido. Yo sé que nos quedan todavía meses por pasar este confinamiento, pero estamos en eso, ¿no? Tratando de sobrevivir y tratando también de que las mujeres tengan una participación y un poco pedirle a los gobiernos y obligar a los gobiernos a que realmente tengamos datos específicos de pueblos indígenas y que no nos mientan en los datos que cada día salen en los informes públicos.
Okay, thank you. Well, due to the time limit, I think I will ask the final question. But actually, I think Khadija already kind of gave us a picture of how it should be to really, in this kind of situation, how can we really respond to it, respond to the crisis, but also there are a lot of details that the government is not really paying attention to, especially regarding to indigenous peoples. So let's be creative that if one day we can create an indigenous government with our, of course, all these criterions that we already fulfill, and we have our own government, what would be the very first thing you would really like to do if you just, what's the first thing come to your mind?
Yo creo que, o sea, sería un sueño hermoso, ¿no? Tener un gobierno indígena y basarnos en esta libre determinación. Yo creo que lo primero que sería es cuidar el territorio del extractivismo, de las forestales, de todas esas empresas que cada día acaban con nuestros territorios. Eso es como lo primero, ¿no? Es como fuera las empresas de los territorios indígenas que nos están matando el agua, que nos dejan cada día sin agua, por ejemplo, en el norte la minería y el extractivismo. Entonces, si estuviera parte de un gobierno indígena, sería eso, ¿no? Y canalizar la economía a base de los principios y las identidades indígenas, ¿no? Volver a una economía a base de lo propio, porque hay harto, es bastante la diversidad que tenemos en flora y fauna. Tenemos alimentos que son importantísimos, como la quinoa, que son alimentos muy nutritivos, que podríamos compartir con la sociedad. Tenemos territorios con densidades territoriales inmensas, con recursos naturales inmensos que le pertenecen a los pueblos indígenas. Yo digo, no somos pobres, nos han empobrecido. Tenemos unas riquezas naturales muy grandes que en un manejo sustentable, en un manejo equilibrado con la madre tierra, podrían ser gran parte de mantener un gobierno indígena. Entonces yo creo que esa es la primera cuestión que realizaría, ¿no? Fuera del extractivismo y mantener un equilibrio con la madre tierra sería lo fundamental.
Thank you very much, and I really like the way you put it. That actually we're not poor; it's the others, they make us poor, and that's something also responding to what Rukka was saying. That we are providing to the world. It's just the world doesn't really recognize that. Thank you again, Hortensia, and maybe you can stay for a little longer, and then maybe we'll come back to you later during our discussion. And now I would like to welcome our next speaker, and he's from Sami. Let's welcome Rune, and he is a Sami, grew up in the Sami community. He engaged in Arctic and Indigenous peoples issues already as a student. And in most of his professional career, he has been involved in policy planning and development as part of the Sami parliament staff, also as an independent consultant in Jaruma AS, as head of the Arctic and Environmental Unit in the Sami Council, as Executive Secretary of the Arctic Council Indigenous Peoples Secretariat, and now he is back at the Sami Parliament as Director General. And all of these positions have given him a thorough understanding of Indigenous issues from different perspectives. So again, let's go back to Ghazali, and we will have Rune with us.
Boris, Rune, glad to have you with us. And by the way, Jocelyn, you can run this whole show, by the way. Like, you did it amazing just now with the segment with Hortensia. Sorry, sidetracking, going back to Rune. Boris, how are you doing and how are you handling COVID-19?
Boris Fallia, thank you all for inviting me to this webinar. I think it's an interesting concept that, due to COVID-19, might be developed into a channel of communication and discussions also when we cannot meet as we usually do. You ask about how the Sami communities are coping with COVID-19. I think that is not a straight, easy answer to that I can give you, because we are separated in 4 different countries, and although we have self-governing structures, we do not have we don't even aim to provide the kind of basic health services and the kind of basic health assistance that would be necessary to manage the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have all in our respective countries been trying to follow and join in on the common policies that has been invoked in the different countries. Just to not, and just in that sense, made sure that there is information also in Sami language so that it comes out to everybody, that is equal in that sense, but otherwise on measures and we haven't really had very strong issues there. That is until the lockdown extended into several months, and the differences between the countries began to create problems, because we have rivers dividing our nation in some parts of the Sami area, where you have always had a common economy, a common interaction across borders, and that was basically stopped during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that, and when the spread of the virus was mainly down south in the populated areas, and we had almost the same spread situation up north, we couldn't see the rationale behind that. We couldn't meet our brothers and sisters on the other side of the border, whereas we could go to the capital capital, where the spread was much heavier and much more difficult. So that the borders in our areas then became an obstacle that every now and then has been through history challenging to us. But now at least Norway and Finland is open, and but Sweden is another issue. There's still widespread also up north there. So we are careful, and we are a traveling people. We don't have the saying "home sweet home." We have the saying to be on the move is better than to stay still, and that, of course, is not very popular these days.
I think wherever your lavu is, that's where your home is. I would imagine.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Rune. Let me talk to you a little bit about your experiences at the international level. I think that's very. I think I want to highlight a couple of them. We started working together in the ALTA process leading up to the World Conference. I keep reiterating that the ALTA outcome document is an Indigenous plan of action of itself, and it goes beyond the World Conference. What stood out for you from that process, or any thoughts on the ALTA outcome document?
Well, just first of all, a couple of, I've heard some of the discussion here, and first of all, a couple of words about the
Sure.
initial idea of the ALTA conference, because as we all remember, that was an initiative. The World Conference on Indigenous Peoples was an initiative that the states came up with in 2010 in December. That was basically an initiative to hold a World Conference in 2014. That wasn't really known in the Indigenous community why they would hold such a conference. And what was the ambition of the states that initiated it, and why the General Assembly even decided it. So we were a group of Indigenous, let me say, diplomats that started to talk. Especially, I would highlight our Asian colleagues and some of our also the Inuits and others that where we actually had to come together and decide how do we handle the fact that they are actually going to hold a big world conference without our involvement. So we had two alternatives. Either we just say that this is your process, we want to participate, or we could go all in and try to take over parts of that initiative and make it as a common, bigger Indigenous push. Because some of our concern at that point was that some states would use this World Conference to backtrack some of the achievements and pull back some of the achievements we had with the declaration and other areas where we had made progress. So that's part of the backdrop here. We made a concept paper. It was made by Leif Dunfjell and John Henriksen then in January 2011. And we circulated that concept paper among a couple of Indigenous organizations. And then we said, the Sami Parliament of Norway decided that this is a good initiative, that we gather, we start a process where we actually go region-wise and try to gather for a big prep conference in ALTA the year ahead of the World Conference, so that we could really make a common push towards the United Nations General Assembly. The Sami Parliament in Norway took then an initial initiative to the Norwegian government, just to say that, hey, would this be something that you want to collaborate with us on? We never asked for permission to hold that conference. We asked for collaboration, and that's in this whole self-determination and self-governing. We have to remember that we should think about the way we phrase ourselves in the dialogue with the states. Are we giving ourselves the status that we want? So we present it as a collaboration, not could you support us, or could we be allowed to hold such a conference? That question surprised, of course, the government of Norway, and they said it was a terrible idea. It was a bad idea. That was their initial response. We didn't ask twice. We said, well, we asked just if you wanted to collaborate with us. That was not a question of permission. So it came to their surprise that we went forward with the idea, and actually went to New York and invited the world to Alta in 2013, a 2-year heads up for the Alta conference. And we were attacked afterwards, but we had then decided that we won't ask for a dime from the government. We would have to be prepared to try to use 2 years to try to raise the money and show that the indigenous peoples are able to actually do things on their own. They don't need the yes or no from the governments and so forth, so on. That meant that we went on a very sort of challenging path, but the thing was that during that, when we came with that invitation, the whole of the world responded constructively, especially the indigenous global community responded very constructively to that initiative. And we said that we will invite you there. We will only facilitate the actual framework, the indigenous government, the governing structures around the world, and the indigenous diplomacy has to come together and find a way to coordinate this work. And as we all know, indigenous peoples are no other than other people. We don't agree on a lot, but we do agree on some things, and we were able to actually to establish a process leading up to this conference that was really as bottom up as possible, because it was done region-wise and it was done respectfully. Nobody interfered with the other regions' way to organize themselves. It was left over to each and every one. And we worked together. We didn't establish any steering committee. We had this facilitating group that was more like keeping it all together, where everyone was involved. So that worked out well. I remember us sitting with representatives in New York and just sketching this process out on a small piece of paper, and it actually, in hindsight, worked just as we planned during a lunch break in New York. So sometimes it works when we all come together and we all just see the need to actually make a push. Fast forward, I do agree that, and I think many agree that we managed to to run a process that got to take its time, and where we really, I mean, the different regions had all these different positions coming into the common negotiations on the outcome document in Alta, but hard negotiating work in Alta made and good preparations from all regions, and I thank them all for participating and contributing, made a very strong document, as you say, go way beyond the General Assembly World Conference outcome document. But yeah, I think there are many things coming together there that shows the strength and potential that we can all utilize if we just focus and do it. And I'm especially proud of the fact that we there was no government behind anything. There was no state behind any of this process, other than chipping in at some point, but on our terms. So that's what I think we all can be proud of. And the teams that were set up in New York, that was there for months and months and negotiated. I mean, everything just worked. But it was a big effort, and I think everybody sort of had wanted it to materialize into some more firm structures that could live on in a better way than it has. But I mean, things change, so I don't know what is the...
I think a little bit more context, because thank you again, Rune, for laying that all out, because not a lot of people know that, like the behind the scenes work. Mm-hmm. For a lot of people that are watching or watching afterwards, over 500 Indigenous people from all over the world came to Alta. It was such a representative meeting, like regionally balanced. Indigenous women, elders, youth, they were all represented. So it is high level of legitimacy, the meeting itself and the document that came out of Alta, the Alta outcome document. Also, and this is more of a subjective thing, it is not, well, no, I'm sorry, I'm sorry to say it differently. It is to a lot of Indigenous peoples, the World Conference. Like the World Conference was held by the United Nations, but for a lot of Indigenous peoples, the meeting in Alta was actually the World Conference. So just a little bit of context to give more meat, more taste to the behind the scenes story that Rune just now shared, because I think that a lot of people need to know that. Rune, one of the outcomes of the World Conference was, of course, like the enhanced participation process. A lot of people do not know that we had the World Conference outcome document, and then we had to lobby again for this enhanced participation process. A lot of people do not know that you were only one of the few that would have to like bend over backwards in New York to make an effort lobbying. That was in 2017. Did how like that whole experience of 2017? What overarching sense did that give to you about how Indigenous peoples are or are not engaging in diplomacy?
Well, I think that whole process, I mean, it highlighted also some of the differences that are between the regions on how we look at various things. I mean, some regions have more institutionalized structures, and some have not. And there's always hard to give a strict definition on how such enhanced participation could be managed. Just say that I recognize that there are different points of departure here within the indigenous community. So what I think is also I think there are many elements here. There was at that point also on the state side a sense of fatigue. Well, we had just finished. First, it was the declaration and the achievements there. Then it was the World Conference, and the whole that took many years. And then we were into new negotiations that was challenging to all parties, and I sensed especially a fatigue from also the indigenous side. I mean, we don't have the personal power, we don't have the economical power. Negotiations are set up in New York, extremely expensive to even go there. I mean, we met 6 times. I traveled every month for half a year for 3-4 days, and people can't. Not everyone can support such negotiations, and in order to do that, you have to have a very strong and broad sense in the community that this is something that should be prioritized. And I understand that most indigenous peoples, even we on the Sami side, have more than enough to do at home than to really push for that part. What disappointed me maybe most was that we were dealing with the UN, and the UN has very strict is the keeper of human rights and of international standards on indigenous peoples, and that the system itself was incapable of understanding that the system should be able to adopt rules that really levels the participation with the rights that we do have as self-determining peoples. That is maybe my biggest disappointment, that we couldn't have this discussion. That, come on, every single country in the world has signed on the United Nations Declarations on Indigenous Peoples, and free, prior, and informed consent with whom? How do we make sure that we actually talk to the people that we are supposed to protect with these regulations, and enhancing that and making the UN as the peoples of the world's body? That is the challenge, and that we couldn't get further in that discussion is most disappointing. Because yes, it's a ever returning challenge that, are you looking for secession? No, that's why we are here. There is a system in the UN to handle secession. There is a system to establish new states. History has shown since, the last 150 years, how many states haven't been created during that period with special procedures and recognition from the international community. So it's bullshit to say that there is no, that's not a black and white issue in that sense. The system for establishing a new state is there. So we are not advocating for that. We are advocating for a system that could protect peoples that don't want to establish separate states. And that dialogue, I feel, is what we are not getting through to the United Nations. We are there begging on our knees, sort of, to be protected from states, not to be one. And that's and to be confronted that we are advocating for breaking things up. No, we are just advocating for our own protection as peoples for the future. And that is, and if governments around the world keep holding that kind of rhetorics high and pushing that way of thinking, I think we're on the wrong track. That's more conflict inducing than necessary, because we are there to actually find protection and comfort.
Thank you Jeroen, for laying that out. One thing that I know that you are have a very strong opinion about, and I would like to pick your brain about, is about mandate. Mm-hmm. I see, just the way that I see it, I see my instructions for Indigenous diplomacy as a dance between developments at the international stage and the mandate from the representative institution. Sure. I see it, one informs the other. Where do you stand on that, like in terms of like firmness of a mandate?
I think that everyone that claims to negotiate on behalf of any given entity has to be able to document that they actually have the support and a mandate to do so. And then it sort of becomes a bit irrelevant whether you have the formal documents in place. I mean, so there's a little bit of a difference there. Just as an example, we appointed John Henriksen as the international representative of the Sami Parliament of Norway to represent us in the UN process on the World Conference, and he didn't have we didn't have an access. We didn't have ECOSOC status, so we couldn't issue any access card or any UN passport for him. So he had to borrow one from Evgia. So he was there basically without an office, a physical office. He was there, but I mean, because he had a mandate and could document that he represented someone, I mean, you could bypass the system and be regarded as a true representative, regardless of your formal documents. And that's also why he was also appointed by the Secretary General as a co-facilitator for the negotiating process. I mean, he was appointed by the UN, but he didn't have a formal access document to even get into the building. so that's the paradox here. So we are still trying to confront that. But I think the most important thing is not whether you have to do it through an organization or an NGO. You have to stretch the system a bit just to get inside. As long as you have an unquestionable mandate from your people, you're fine. I mean, that's where you will get your voice heard, and people will see through, that.
Thank you so much, Jeroen. Like we're coming to the end of this segment. Anything that you really want to talk about that we did not discuss, but you really want to say or want people to think about?
Well, I think one thing that we all should think about when we work in Indigenous advocacy is that often we are ourselves our worst enemies. And that's the people are, we often discuss principles, but then our neighbor becomes the president of something that we have created. And we don't like our neighbor. Okay, we shoot it down. So I mean, that is also, I hear often that people criticize in our setting, in the Sami community, some may criticize that Norwegian government or whichever government doesn't pay adequate respect to our president. Well, that all begins with the fact that we ourselves give that position the status that we wanted to have. We pay the position the respect, and then we have to tolerate that that maybe it is our neighbor that holds that position that we might not like personally, but we shouldn't attack the position because of that. That is to take it down on a very small level, but this is something that I think is universal and is a challenge. When we all really come together and put those things aside, and we identify the things that we should fight for as peoples, we have shown through the history, especially in the UN system, that we can succeed. And that's, I think we should never underestimate the strength that we have ourselves. We have always focus on the things that we don't have, but don't underestimate the things that we do have.
Thank you so much, Rune, for that final point. I think it's very relevant, mostly overlooked by a lot of Indigenous peoples. Thank you so much for highlighting that. Let me end by saying thank you so much, Summer Parliament of Norway, for like the efforts, the amount of effort that you have put into like the World Conference process, like doing all the logistical, the technical support, and yourself as well. Like a lot of, we always look at the people that are like the leadership, but it's also important to acknowledge the people that do hard work behind the scenes. So I would, in addition, of course, to for the President of the Summer Parliament of Norway, I would like to very much thank you so much for your work, and looking forward to keep on working and talking to you. Thank you so much, Rune.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting.
All right, thank you. Thank you. I would also like to express my gratitude to Sami Parliament in Norway and also to Rune. You know, the ALTA conference is it's overwhelming. And I think it's a very precious experience for a lot of Indigenous peoples who had participated in that meeting. As for, at that time, I was the co-chair of the Youth Caucus, and we had very difficult discussion in those 3 days, but I learned a lot, and also all these experiences are still very useful, I would say, for me until now, because I'm not in politics, and I was experiencing politics at that time already. So yeah, thank you for preparing me to be in the politics. And okay, now let's come to, I think that will be our final speaker today. And let's welcome Estebancio Castro Diaz. Sorry for my pronunciation. And he is indigenous from the Kuna peoples. He provides assistance to the indigenous leaders from, I'm not so sure if I can pronounce it like this, Koika, the coordinator of indigenous organizations of the Amazon River Basin, and other from Latin America and their base organizations to advocate for REDD, R-E-D-D, and other priorities they might have at the COP's meeting of the UNFCCC. And he facilitates Koikas and other indigenous leaders engagement on panels and side events, and assist in preparation of proposals or submissions to the UNFCCC, including on the platform for traditional knowledge. He also elaborates of a training guide on the rights of indigenous peoples, REDD+, and safeguards, taking into account the local reality and with an indigenous approach and perspective of the Mesoamerica and South America regions as a tool of the training process. And I would say that's I would really like to listen to his sharing, because as I mentioned earlier, that it's very much needed that we need to have someone to provide all this assistance for us to navigate ourselves in all this complicated process, and also all these details that might take us a big lead, but if we don't pay attention or if we don't get the insights to those details, it might take us years to go through all this process. So again, Ghazali, it's your time, and also Estebancio.
Yeah, Estebancio, if ever there's one person, at least in my view, that is right in the middle of the triangle, climate change, biodiversity, and human rights, it is Estebancio. Like, he's very much involved in all three, not only involved, but also very experienced in all three streams, elements of indigenous rights advocacy. Estebancio, how are you doing? How hard is, I know that COVID-19 is hitting Kunayala very hard. How are you doing right now? Yeah, I think you have to like make sure that your microphone is working. So if you go to them, yep, and now put it on unmute. All right. If you see the mute button, there's an arrow that points up. Click on it, and then it says select a microphone. So, and you can pick the microphone that you're using. That works, by the way. Yeah, while Estebancio was trying to figure that out, I just got word from Handaine. Of course, it is a holy day for a Muslim community, so that's why there was a lot of interference with his connection. So he excused himself, and we'll be able to bring him back the next session. So hopefully Estebancio is able to make it work. Hold on. It's not working, hey? Yeah, there's not a lot of things I can do from here though. You want to switch over to your phone? Okay. So you log off and go back to your phone. Sure, that's fine. Apologize, everyone. We're just rock and roll. We're just trying to make best with what we can. Jocelyn. So
yeah?
I think we have to talk for a little bit before Estebancio can come back.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. We talked about constitutional reform, sovereignty, self-determination. What stood out from you so far? Anything?
I was still thinking about this question, that how can we bring, actually for me, self-determination and sovereignty the very base is in us, you know, our individual, our own behavior, our own decision making, and also how can we make control of ourselves. I mean, like, for example, in the podcast we had last year, we talked about wearing indigenous attire. I think that's also something that we can start practicing to really exercise what is self-determination, right? Because as I mentioned earlier, and as our discussion saying that sometimes we thought we had to look in a certain way to prove that we are indigenous enough to be able to speak for our people. But why? Why do we have to prove that? I mean, proof of we are indigenous enough to, I don't know, to the government or to someone else. I think the only people that we should really, in a way, to get the recognition or to get the to get the recognition from would be our own people. If our own people approve us, we don't need to put on our traditional attire to announce that we are indigenous. And I guess that's also something, you know, self-determination mean, that we should be able to make this kind of decision without being required by others. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I made a tweet about that. Like, being indigenous is like being Superman. Not that we have superpowers, not that I know of, for one. I think, but Superman is still Superman whether he wears his glasses or not. And these peoples are still indigenous peoples whether we wear our traditional attire or not. You know, and it is up to us, like you said, like, to decide whether we wear our traditional attire. It is. We don't have to prove anything. Like, I'm not asking a representative of the Swiss government or the German government or the Panamanian government to wear his or her traditional clothes so that I can identify him as being from that country. I think that's also, it's a very good part of self-determination. A lot of people think about self-determination about country and state, but it goes beyond that. It goes more into the individual choices that we make as indigenous individuals.
Yeah, exactly. And if we can practice, like, you know, to every indigenous individuals, then I think naturally we have better sense of how can apply self-determination to, I don't know, like community or even state level, because we practice it ourselves every day in our daily life anyway. So
yeah. Right. Hopefully everyone can stay like 10 to 15 minutes longer with us. As the Bancho is with us right now. At least I can hear him, so that's good.
Yeah, this works.
Oh, perfect. Nice haircut, by the way. Love it.
Just remind me that I'm in the jail.
Oh boy, like no, you're not. Well, it feels like jail, but it's hopefully it is not. Full disclosure, this Bancho is a very good friend of mine. Like, I already said it in introduction about where he is in terms of like indigenous movement. Very active and very influential as well. So what I wanted to ask you is how, like, we all heard that COVID-19 is hitting Kuniala very hard. Lost a cacique, a chief, a couple of days ago. How are you experiencing quarantine now before we go into like indigenous movement, indigenous rights, et cetera, et cetera?
Okay, I'm gonna be very quickly. I knew that to be the last speaker was gonna be complicated because you can have a lot of time or you're gonna have a less time. So that's fine. Thank you for the introduction, Jocelyn and Ghazali and all the rest of the panelists who have been before me expressing your ideas. I think that's great ideas. I'm probably gonna be repeating some of them. Regarding to your question, we as Akuna peoples live a very complicated situation. One, because our region is considered difficult access. which has been perfect for us because the colonization is stopping the colonization, is stopping the foreign, how you say, attack or come to our lands and territories. But now make us difficult because the lack of medicine, the basic medicine, some of you already highlighted, and also the basic food that is needed for the communities, and then the quarantine make difficult because then we have to think about the benefit of the whole community or just one person. So that's very difficult what we have. Now the COVID-19, I think that didn't bring any extra human rights violations or and other things. I think that the only thing that COVID-19 brought to this discussion is that make visible our real situation of indigenous people that we have in our communities, because we have still discrimination, we have still, as Hortensia say, support from the national government. We have we don't have the a strong legal and politics framework on the rights of indigenous people and many communities of the Latin American. So that's made difficult for indigenous peoples really face directly and try to control the COVID-19. So that's more or less quickly, because I know that there are coming another questions. So, and I have 10 minutes. So, yeah.
No. You don't have to rush through anything. Of course, zooming in on the movement, the work that you do, that we're both involved in. Let me start with an easy one. Talk to me about what attracts you in the movement. What are you a fan of?
Hey, that's a very funny question, because this can go wrong like Jocelyn did. I think that one thing that I really attract me when I first time went to the UN, I think that the elders from North America, from Pacific especially, and they advised me saying something like, hey, boy, you know that takes time to achieve something here at the UN. That's one thing that I stay, and one thing that as Arune say, we may have different opinions because we have a different environment, we have a different regions, but it's still what attract me is at the end of the day or at the end of the week, we have a collective opinion all together and try to push and achieve at least one sentence, two sentences, one policy that's gonna be very helpful for indigenous people. So that's what attract me, the collective work that we still maintain as indigenous peoples. Yeah, we may contradict ourselves, we may disagree the opinion from the other regions, but at the end of the day, we try to manage to have at least one or two, three ideas that could work for the benefit of all indigenous peoples. So that's what attracts me. And also the indigenous people, I'm fan of the indigenous people's diplomacy. I think that that's very important. I think that many, as you in your introduction of my person stated, I have been in 3 different UN agencies, which has changed by the time because we are there. So the indigenous diplomacy need to be where the indigenous people's discussion is active. Because if we are not there, anyway, the state representatives, the UN agencies will take the control, will decide what they need to do, and then that's going to be more difficult for our people when the policies come directly from international level to the national level. So that's what we need to avoid. So that I can say that I'm #1 fan of the indigenous people diplomacy, and I appreciate very much the young indigenous people should come to this arena and try to do the best and continue the work that our elders, because we just going by in this arena, in this forest, but we're not permanent here. So we need obviously changes and different people and updatings and stuff.
As Vanchal, you were one of the key players, for example, in the Paris agreement in terms of like Indigenous people's rights being reflected. I want to talk a little bit about that, because what a lot of people think or they don't know is that we are fighting hard for like one words in a particular sentence, that, and a lot of people think that we come in and we put in like entire paragraphs, like pages of the document. What would you like? What can you tell to these people about like what you said? Like it's about small steps. It's about the keep coming back.
I think that, yeah, that's a very good question. I think that we need to develop those answer to question like this, because people can understand. Because sometimes, as Rune always also say, you know, we are our own enemies. You know, because I'm not here, and how can they be fighting for one paragraph? But they don't understand the background of the history of that. For example, I remember talking about the UNFCCC and related to this matter is that when I came in 2008 to the UN climate change conference, they only talk about the business. Is what they say. I came on the corridor and talked with the diplomats and tried to explain the importance of the indigenous people's rights. In order, we are talking now about the red that time, in order to red make more acceptable for indigenous peoples. I think that as some people remember, is what they say, is a slogan that we made about no rights, no red, you know, because for us it's important to be reflected, because it's the only thing that we have in order to minimize the negative impact the policy may have in the future. So 2008, they didn't want to see even human rights. And everybody that they start supporting this work, and they would say, just go to Geneva or New York. This is what the human rights is there. But now, after, we can say 12 years after, no, I'm sorry, after 7 years, and when, because we're talking about the Paris Agreement, we see the change. We see the biggest step that we have made only because we started loving the state, friend of group of friends, sorry, that can make it work, and we can go continue with our work, because we really knew that if they talk in business, the only thing that really matter is that we have the implementation of the human rights, the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and other related instruments that exist. If we don't do that, we may not have a policy that could not help in the future. For example, now we talk about the Article 6 is still on, and probably people think, one article, they're fighting all day and spending until 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, but they think that the importance that they have, and this is a recommendation for the young people to contact people who have been in this process and understand that's not one day for one day the other day. That has been years. years of the things that we have learned in the process. And also we have been educating the government representative as well, because they change so many times. For example, every 4 years sometime, because the government changed, the state changed the new government. So that's what I think that the importance of the Paris Agreement, and especially when we talk about, I know that we're not talking about the indigenous knowledge system, but I think that it's important to mention, because it's one of the in one of the paragraphs mentioned that indigenous knowledge system, and we're not mentioning in this traditional knowledge, because traditional knowledge for some of us is nothing. You know, it's not dynamic, it's static. But we know that from our communities, our indigenous knowledge system is a system, is a knowledge that has been developed and keep developing. So we need to take this paragraph, maybe I only have like 6 sentences, but mean a lot of things, and mean and also help to indigenous peoples at the national level to look after the work that the government is doing in indigenous communities, or not doing in indigenous communities, but they have an obligation with the Paris Agreement. And also, for example, one of the things is national determined contributions, you know, how they are doing. And I have been reading lately many of the Latin American documents, and saying, and most of the indigenous community even don't know what they really selling to the UNFCCC. So that's I think that that's the importance that this Paris Agreement for us. And I think that we need to keep working on this. We need to understand this in order to make more easy our work at the national level.
Estebancio, also something that has been emerging over the last couple of years, not only climate change, human rights, enhanced participation, regions trying to deal, or not deal, but communicate with other regions, dealing with or approaching, for example, Indigenous peoples from Latin America. What is the biggest advice you would give to Indigenous peoples from other regions? Because it is not as black and white, or not as easy as people think it is. I would assume, like from experience.
Yes, I think that I think that, as I say, probably Rune will be laughing on this, and we have seen in the caucus, and also Tove, who has been many years in our caucuses, especially for the working group on indigenous populations, and later on different UN agencies meeting. For example, sometimes the difficulties that we have as a Latin American delegate is the language barrier. Has been one thing that makes difficult to other people to understand the work that need to do, or how to approach indigenous people from Latin America. I think that we have organization established. For example, we have Indigenous International Forum on Biodiversity. We have a platform for regional discussion of indigenous people in different matters. For example, there are a group of for biodiversity, for young climate change, and other topics that has been emerging lately. So it's not that there is no existence of indigenous bases or indigenous peoples from Latin America having infrastructure. There exists. The thing is that I feel, and my recommendation is what you asked, is to ask to the people from the other regions to not approach because I'm handsome, because I'm a happy person, I'm quite funny. No, approach to the people who have been in the process, and approach to the people, to the elders, and ask the question, what can we do? I think that all the Latin American group, they are open. They are open to explain their position, what they think, because one thing that we have to understand, as Rune say, we have differences. We have we live in different background and grassroots systems. For example, the Nordic countries have different kind of development, and we live in the third world countries. So that's made differences that has been possible to understand each other. So yeah, my recommendation is that please do not take this granted because you meet a Latin America and you think that this is how it works. There are places that you can approach, as I say, the platform. For example, I cannot talk in many processes about the Andean indigenous peoples because they have their own group. Of course, we have one group to meet all together. And we have a COICA with the Amazon Basin, and we also have a Charcop group, and we have the Mesoamerican group. And can you imagine? We have a big 4 groups, which is also divided in small groups. So we really need to take this into account. Not to think Latin American is one thing. And probably the same thing in Africa. Africa have a Francophone, have English speakers, even Spanish speaker they have. You know, so this is how I think that people, state representatives need to understand that even that we have in one region as a Latin American and Caribbean, but we have differences. We have our own ideas which need to bring together, and then can you imagine how work is starting? I'm very sure in different regions as well. You need to get agreement in your own regions, and then come back and agree with another 7 regions, and then go with this with the diplomats and see if we can work, our work can go ahead for the benefit of indigenous peoples of the world.
Atamancho, I've like 2 small questions actually. In terms of your best moment working for Indigenous people's rights at the UN, and you by the way, and you cannot mention that meeting that you and I and Matthias had at the Mexican mission. You cannot mention that one. And like, what would you like to see develop for Indigenous peoples in the next 10 years?
Ooh, okay. Well, I actually that was my answer when I not really. That is part of the interview. I think that the best moment, whether I was there or not in presence, that was the UN adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because that brought me all the moments that we have as a region, as a individuals, the work, the collective work that we did, and then we just achieve. I know that the document is not perfect, but we can work out with this, and that's the important thing, I guess, in my life, to see that document be adopted, and also in that moment, I felt all the people from North American, from Pacific that I have met, elders, that no longer they were in that moment to see, but they just leave the legacy, you know, that people that we have met, and I just feel happy for them, and hopefully that they were looking that day down here and say, oh, yes, we just got it. Maybe not perfect, but we just got it. So that's one thing. I think that this, because also for me, this document has been important, not only for the UN itself, but also for the UN agency, For example, as you say, UN framework on climate change has been, because in 2010, we made to reflect the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in Boston. I think it was in Boston. Yeah, well, one of the scopes, and it was reflected because it's a document that opened the doors, and also the change of the traditional knowledge work to indigenous knowledge within the UN CVD meetings. So those are things that are, for me, has been important and continue being important. For example, I know that this question coming later on, the enhanced participation is so important for us for the same reason, because that's gonna change different discussion, different forums gonna be more open, and probably our rights be more reflected, implemented at the national level. So that was, now the 10 years, as I say, since the beginning, when I started, people already say, this is a torture. The UN system is a torture. Just step by step, step by step. So it's okay. But then I just think, okay, we established the UN Permanent Forum, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We somehow changed the working group on indigenous populations to the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples. Maybe the mandate are not the ones that we wanted to have, but step by step, we have been moving ahead. So what we don't have in MRIP and Permanent Forum or the Special Rapporteur in the mandate, and I see that in 10 years, we will have more specific mandate as soon as say protecting our own people, our resources, our lands and territories. So I hope that in 10 years we have new institutions. We may have a better understanding of the issues, that how to go further with our proposals.
Okay, right, thank you. Well, I have to say first, I couldn't really recognize you as Spencer because did you lose a lot of weight? Yeah, they're good. Okay, so actually, I want to ask a final question. I know we really over time for, I don't know, half an hour or something like that, but I really want to ask this final question, especially to you, because I think you know the situation that I've been confronting at the United Nations, that because Taiwan is not recognized as a country by United Nations, and so that make that really challenged me a lot for the past 15 years for me to go to United Nations. But I found a possible opportunity for us, because for the people who are not recognized, it's not only the indigenous people in Taiwan, but also a lot of indigenous people around the world. They are not recognized by their countries. They are not recognized by internationally. But there's this discussion about having indigenous entity as the observer or any other kind of actor that can be recognized, and also to be official participant to the United Nations. So besides the state government, the indigenous entity might also be possible to participate in this process in a more, I would say, in a way with more dignity. And also I think that's something we really want, because indigenous entities, indigenous government is not NGO. we are not non-governmental organizations. So I would like to ask you, what do you see that if this really possible, maybe in 10 years or in some time, and also what would that be really another kind of opportunity for indigenous peoples to really have enhanced participation in this whole process?
Oh, thank you, Jocelyn. Yes, I just, you respond to your first question. Yes, I have lost a lot of weight because the COVID-19. But anyway, I feel okay. That's okay. That's fine. Maybe I'm missing a lot of Ghazali to you and other people, so I'm getting sick. Not really. Hey, okay. About your question about indigenous movement and stuff, I think that this is the last question you say, so I'm gonna try to put all together. I believe that the enhanced participation of indigenous people within the UN system is possible. It's possible within the 10 years. But I think that, and also regarding to your question back home, is that it's not that we are asking to the governments if we are indigenous peoples or not. It's why we have the UN Declaration talking about the self-identifications. Who are they to say that we are not indigenous peoples? You know, and our self-determination to pursue our economic, cultural, and economic development is important for us, and they may need to understand, as Hortensia highlighted as well in her comments. I think that the work that we do at the international level as an Indigenous Peoples movement have been important. I think that, for example, I would like to remind to all Indigenous peoples that the work, what we are asking in this process is not from 3 years ago, 5 years ago. We're talking about from the 70s, or maybe beyond of that. You know, for example, when we talk about enhanced participation, how we want to see, now we have one document which we have our paper. Also, we have a Quito document. They are not new documents. They are documents who came, as Arune highlighted as well, from the regions, from the global consultation in Alta, out document for the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. So we cannot say this is something new that we are doing. Shouldn't be allowed to do that, and Indigenous people should not ask to that, because they have been listening all the processes that we have been on for a long time, even since the beginning, since the establishment of the Working Group on Indigenous People in 1982 or before that. For example, if we read the the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we may not understand. But if you ask to the people who have been in this process to explain article by article, you may understand how it came to reflect on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So those things are very important that we need to take ourselves, understand that the enhanced participation is possible. The enhanced participation also gonna make easy, not easy, but a more flexible way to move Indigenous people from the UN system itself to the other UN agencies. For example, we still don't have full and effective participation in UNESCO, for just to mention one, from the health organization. Health World Organizations or World Health Organization, and others that make to understand that things has been changing and need to be updated as well as a state where we live as an individual also, or as a collective indigenous peoples. So I think that that's important, and I think that yeah, it is possible, and gonna be another big step, but we need to continue because every time the world is changing, and we need to adapt to that, and also we need to protect our people, our lands and territories and resources.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that day to come, and that will really open up another. Yeah, like I think the world will be really different if that could really happen. So thank you again, and also I would like to thank all the speakers today, because it's night in Taiwan, but it's different time in other parts of the world. But anyway, and also I would like to thank the interpreters again. Thank you for being for being with us and also doing such a great job. And we hope all audience, you all enjoy episodes of the webinar series. The next episode will be Friday, August 7th, again, 2 p.m. in Geneva time. And well, in Taiwan, that will be 8 p.m. But anyway, we'll have new guests from all over the world again in our next episode. And you can sign up right now already. Just go to linker.ee/Gomaluku. Okay, and again, we would like to thank the interpreters for their amazing support, the guests for sharing their thoughts and time, and also the partners in the special series. That would be Tuomas Aslak Juuso, DOCIP, Drumbeat Media, and TV Indigena. And please help us to keep the conversation going on Twitter with the hashtag #HowToIndigenousNow, and you can tag Ghazali in your post. Again, Ghazali on Twitter, you can tag him. It's at GOMALUKU. And feel free to share any questions, screenshots, or feedback. And again, thank you for watching and hope to see you next week.